Welcome back to our series on enterprise risk management. In our last session, we focused on analyzing risk for Apple's iPhone division. To do that, we used judgmental evaluations to rate likelihood and impact to assess risk severity for the risk identified in our inventory. Today, we're building on that by learning how to prioritize risk for response. We'll be using a simple yet effective framework that incorporates inherent risk, risk appetite, and velocity. We'll also explore how certain capabilities and current resources factor into decision making so that Apple can ensure risk responses are both effective and practical. Let's get started. So why prioritize risk? Well, it helps in two key ways. The first way, it'll allow management to focus on what matters most by directing attention to severe risks that need urgent responses. And then secondly, it guides risk responses effectively by aligning decisions with the risk appetite. Prioritization is all about enabling strategic decision making. Okay, we answered the why. Now let's answer the question of how do we prioritize risk? Well, we start by considering three dimensions, and we start with inherent risk severity. Inherent risk is calculated as impact by likelihood, and it gives us a sense of how significant the risk is. For example, a risk might have a major impact in an almost certain likelihood, and that would give it a high inherent risk. Then we move to the next dimension, which is risk appetite alignment. Here, we compare the inherent risk severity to the target risk appetite for a particular risk. So what this means is if an inherent risk severity exceeds the appetite, it's considered misaligned. It's going to need more attention from management. And the final dimension is velocity. So this is a new term for us, but it has a simple meaning. Velocity measures how quickly a risk impact materializes. So we categorize velocity speeds as slow, moderate, fast, rapid, or very rapid to ultimately assess the urgency. For instance, a supply chain disruption. This might have a rapid velocity, while a risk like shift in consumer preferences could materialize much slower. Using inherent risk, risk appetite, and velocity, we create high, moderate, and low priority groups. And each one of these groups has its own set of characteristics. In the high priority group, we have high inherent risk with fast or rapid velocity, and there's a significant misalignment with the risk appetite. As an example, failure to secure customer data effectively would be a high priority risk for Apple in this example. And it's simple. It has a high inherent risk, it's misaligned with Apple's low risk appetite for privacy related risk, and it would show its effects maybe within a quarter. And this would make it a fast velocity risk. In the moderate priority group, we have a moderate inherent risk or velocity and somewhat of a manageable misalignment with risk appetite. Good example here would be the supply chain risk. This risk has a moderate to high inherent risk, is somewhat misaligned with the appetite, and would typically take a few weeks to materialize, making it a rapid velocity risk. Finally, we have the low priority group. So risk in this group is effectively going to be characterized by low levels of inherent risk, slow velocity, or appetite alignment. So a good example would be the risk of falling behind in technology innovation. The inherent risk might be moderate to high, but it's aligned with the risk appetite, and its effects would take about a year to develop, making it a low velocity risk. Additional considerations to aid the prioritization step would be Apple's current capabilities and their current resources. Capabilities are the organization's tools, expertise, and processes they have in place to currently address risk. For example, Apple could evaluate current cybersecurity protocols and their respective processes when considering how they should respond to the data security risk. Then we move to resources, and here we're really just talking about the budget, time, and personnel available to support any of the risk responses for these risks. For example, with the supply chain risk, management would assess whether resources could be allocated to mitigate any disruptions. By considering capabilities and resources alongside prioritization, Apple ensures that decisions for risk responses are both informed and actionable. With that said, we'll wrap up with the 4 primary response options, and we'll start with accepting the risk. Here, no action is taken to change the severity of the risk. This response is appropriate when the risk severity is already within the risk appetite. So if the risk severity is outside the appetite, accepting a risk like this would usually require some type of board or committee level approval. The next response is avoiding the risk. Here, an action is taken to eliminate the risk entirely, such as ceasing an activity or declining expansion into a new market per se. This option is appropriate when no other response can mitigate the risk to an acceptable level of severity or bring the risk within the appetite. Then we move to the reduce option. Here, action is taken to mitigate or reduce the risk severity by lowering likelihood or impact, aligning it with the target risk appetite for that risk. For example, strengthening cybersecurity controls to mitigate any data security risk in the iPhone software. This type of response is appropriate when management has considered resources and capabilities, determined that further actions and controls are needed. Finally, we have the share or transfer option. Here, action is taken to transfer or share part of the risk, such as through outsourcing, hedging, or purchasing insurance. This response is appropriate when an organization needs to transfer a portion of the impact. Okay, we covered a lot today. Let's recap. We introduced a framework for evaluating and prioritizing risk based on inherent risk, appetite alignment, velocity, and consideration of capabilities and resources in an organization. By integrating these elements, Apple can allocate resources efficiently and make informed decisions for risk responses. So in the next and final lesson, we'll tie everything that we've learned so far together, and we're going to review the output of this risk assessment. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.